Yo. All right. Perfect. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm the guy. So, I'm starting a series. It's going to be a bunch of small, short videos. I'm aiming for 10 minutes or less. The goal of this new series is to just give as much useful information as possible to those going through faith crises or those who are now in the reconstruction/rebuilding stage of a faith crisis. I guess it's apt that I'm starting with identity versus role confusion. So we're diving into Erikson a little bit here, and we're just going to talk about stage 5 for him. And stage 5 for Erikson is called identity versus role confusion. It maps on pretty well to kind of stage 3 or stage 4. If you've watched the Fowler video already, it maps on pretty well to kind of overcoming stage 3 and landing in stage 4, in my opinion, right? I'm not a licensed psychologist yet. I am working on it. But I think that this is a very apt stage to start with because you really are reconstructing everything from the ground up. Well, even though I don't think that it's totally necessary to go from like industry all the way to like stage 2 of Erikson's, which if I remember correctly is industry versus guilt and shame. We're going to go to stage 5. I think, okay, again, my opinion, I think that when you leave a high demand religion or any religion, you have to redo stage 5. So, we're gonna hop into my computer right now. We're gonna go over I've created a very small PowerPoint that kind of goes over this, and we're just gonna talk about it, and I hope that this is helpful. If it is helpful to you, and you know somebody who's also going through a faith crisis, please share this video with them. This was actually huge for me. Seeing where I fell on kind of my new identity was important, and I'm going to try and link at the very end of this. I'm not going to show it on the screen or anything, but at the very end of this, you will have an opportunity in the description to follow a link that allows you to take a quiz that tells you kind of where you are on the identity matrix, is what I'm calling it. Okay, so again, if this is helpful for you, share it with somebody else who maybe it could be helpful for. All right, so we are in Erikson's 5th stage. Here we go. Identity versus role confusion. I'm going to read this paragraph here. As articulated by Erikson, identity versus role confusion is the 5th of 8 stages of psychosocial development that take place between the ages of 12 and 19. During this stage, adolescents need to develop a sense of self and personal identity. Success leads to an ability to stay true to oneself, while failure leads to role confusion and a weak sense of self. In the latter phases of this stage, a child develops a sense of sexual identity. All right. During this stage, when you go through it the first time, you are a teenager. You are maybe starting to realize that there are other groups, there are other roles that you fit into, there are other groups that you fit into, and you're having a hard time distinguishing between who the real you is behind all of those roles. You have the version of you who your parents want you to be. You have the version of you who your friends want you to be. You have the version of you that your church is telling you to be, although sometimes that is also the same as your parents. And so you're trying to figure out, underneath all of these layers, who am I? What is me? And if your parents allow you to explore and allow you to really kind of fill those shoes as you grow, then you develop a very strong sense of self, and it's very healthy. If you are nudged into a box, or if you are, let's say you're a beautiful, lovely river, right? And you want to go this way because that's where the canyon is taking you. But your dad goes out, and your mom goes out, and your church goes out, and they dam up this side of the river right here, and they dig a new canal that sends you a different direction. Now you're becoming something that you didn't want to be, right? We're getting into the idea of Greek telos here. What telos is and what telos means is it's the ultimate aim of something. It's the object's purpose. And so I'll use this example because I have a computer mouse right here with me. You might ask yourself, oops, I forwarded in the PowerPoint there. You might ask yourself, is this a good thing to use as a baseball? It's a stupid question, I know. And the answer is obviously no, right? Because that's not the purpose of this thing, right? You could try, might not go so well. You might be getting mugged, or you just get mugged sometimes. You might be walking down the street, and maybe it's dark, and maybe you're in an area that you're not familiar with, and so you kind of clutch your bag a little bit tighter, and maybe I'll use this as a weapon if I have to, right? And you could ask yourself, is this a good weapon? Well, it's a backpack with a computer in it, so I don't know if it's a good weapon, but if that's what it has to be, then that's what it has to be, right? But it's not the purpose of the thing, is the point that I'm trying to make. As we've now established, telos is the ultimate aim of an object, or the purpose of an object. I find this to be incredibly fascinating because you, person who are watching this, are an object. What? Did you just objectify me? Kind of. To assume that we have ultimate aims is not necessarily like a crazy or radical idea. Riffing on the idea of sin here, in the Mormon Church, sin is when you disobey God's commandments, right? Well, what if sin simply means to deviate from your purpose, right? The purpose that you decide. The word sin that we use today originated in Greece, and I'm probably not pronouncing this correctly, but it is hamartia. Okay, so and that's an archery term, and I'm now borrowing this from Jordan Peterson. That's an archery term that essentially means you missed your bullseye, right? You missed the mark. And so if we are establishing now that we are individuals who have a purpose, who have an aim, then we can kind of come up with this new secular definition of the word sin, where it has nothing to do with what God's commandments are. It has nothing to do with what our culture is telling us to do. It's an entirely internal process, right? When you sin, you are deviating from the path that you feel you've set up for yourself. You are coming out of alignment. You are kind of going off kilter with the purpose that you have established for yourself. And it's very important that you are the one who is establishing this purpose, right? Nobody else can establish this purpose for you. Nobody else can set this aim for you. If I break some sort of internal moral code that I have decided is right for me, that and only that is sin. Trying to bring different type of relevancy to these old tired terms that we're all familiar with. Religion is a great kind of infrastructure. It kind of gives you like good bare bones for like how you could live a proper or moral or happy life. However, sometimes I find religion to be a little bit too overbearing, and it kind of imposes its definitions and its will and its purpose on you, where it should be nothing more than, hey, do you want to climb this ladder? Because this ladder could take you to this place. And then you could look at it and say, well, that isn't taking me where I want to go. I feel like I should be doing something else. I think I'm going to climb this ladder. But the ladder itself, the structure itself, is still there. I hope that makes sense. Identity versus role confusion here, for me, is a person figuring out what they are for. You can only really tell if you're good or bad at being yourself if you know what yourself is for, in my opinion. And so you do need to listen to that voice in your head, right? This is the part of the video, I guess, where I tell you the voice in your head doesn't have to carry any sort of spiritual baggage. The voice in your head could be your conditioned voice, right? The thing that you have dialogue with based on all the past dialogues that you've ever had, right? If I'll say it like this: if you've always been mean to yourself, chances are you have a very judgmental inner voice. If you've always been very nice to yourself and very accepting of yourself, chances are you have a very loving and kind inner voice, right? The inner voice is nothing more than the average of the ways that you've treated yourself over your life, in my opinion. So this is when you need to connect with that version of yourself. And you need to start treating yourself like the version of you that you think that you could be or want to be, right? And over time, if that's a very harsh voice, over time it will soften. If you haven't read The Alchemist, you should read The Alchemist. It has a very beautiful part at the very end, or towards the end, where the main character is having a conversation, like kind of metaphorically, mythologically. He's having a conversation with his heart. And his heart says, if you stop listening to me, I cannot help you anymore. If you stop listening to me, I will eventually stop talking to you. All I want is for you and I to be happy. That's my purpose as your heart, as your soul, kind of. All I want is for you to be happy, but if you never listen to me, then I cannot talk to you. It doesn't have to be a spiritual voice. It's just you talking to yourself. It's just you kind of planning all by yourself. There's no spiritual side to this necessary if that makes you uncomfortable. If you like the spiritual side, keep the spiritual side, right? Okay, so we're moving on now. This is my favorite part of the whole PowerPoint. I already know that I'm going over 10 minutes. I'm sorry, everybody. So this is what I call the identity matrix. It's awesome. By the way, if you're just like, the phone is in your pocket or something and you're just kind of listening, up until this point of the video, I think that that's a great way to kind of take this video in. However, I would recommend that you maybe pause it or screenshot this and watch and read this later, because this is helpful. So here you see that we kind of have like a strange looking graph that I tried my very best to make as clear as possible. But we see that we have two kind of, it's almost a flow chart. It could be turned into a flow chart. I like it kind of in this form better, but we're asking two questions here. So we're on a matrix and the y-axis is crisis and the x-axis is commitment. And so the question is on the y-axis, has the individual had a chance to explore identity options? There's a yes and there's a no. This is a pretty binary question, right? Have you had a chance to explore your options? If you have, say yes. If you haven't, say no. Now we're moving up to the x-axis here. Has the individual had a chance to commit to an identity? Yes or no. Again, this is a binary question. Have you or have you not? So yes or no. Answer this. Now, if you said no, I have not had a chance to explore my options, and no, I have not made a choice yet. So you're in like the beginning stage of identity versus role confusion. You haven't really had a chance to think about what you are, what your purpose is, and you haven't committed to anything. We spend a lot of time here. That's totally fine. This is called identity diffusion, and it's right if you're here in the earlier stages of your life. If you're 30 and you're here, or if you're 40 and you're here, this is not to shame anybody. If this is where you are and you're 30 years old, then it would be a good time to maybe dedicate a few minutes a day, maybe an hour a week, to kind of confronting this question, right? Maybe you could start asking, what are my options at this point? What are my interests? How could I merge my options and my interests so that I maybe start moving towards identity achievement, which is the gold standard of this kind of chart? Okay, so that's what identity diffusion is. Now, if you stay in this space for too long, I think diffusion is the perfect word for this. Eventually, you kind of evaporate. You spread yourself too thin. You become formless. You become aimless. This is not a good place. This is the best place to start. This is not a good place to be for a long period of time. So let's move on to identity foreclosure. This is when the crisis, or the question of have you had a chance to explore your options? The answer is no. However, you've already committed to something. So this could be you doing what your parents wanted you to do. This could be you just kind of like following the steps that your culture put forward for you, and now you are at the end of the road and you've clearly arrived somewhere. Upon looking back, you realize that you didn't really choose any of the steps that brought you here. This is hard. This is extremely hard. I feel that this is where I was for a while. And this is when you kind of need to grab life by the throat a little bit and impose your will on life. And that sounds way simpler than it really is. I know that this is a hard process, but this is where you have to tell yourself, ultimately, this is my life. I get to live it how I want, and I want to do it this way. I'm changing paths. And so you hop paths, and sometimes that means going back to identity diffusion and starting from there, but this time with the control happening within yourself instead of outsourcing that sort of control to others. Okay, now we're moving on to identity moratorium. This is where a crisis has arrived and you have not yet made a decision. Again, this is a normal place to be. This is the proper flow. If you ask me the proper flow that people, I don't want to like say that there's one way to go through this phase. It seems to me that a person who is kind of going about the normative human development process would go from identity diffusion to identity moratorium to identity achievement. Now, basically what's happening here is you haven't had a chance to think about it, and so you haven't made a decision. Then you have had a chance to think about it, and you haven't yet made a decision. Eventually, you will have contemplated and given your life the amount of thought that you feel it deserves, and then you will make a choice and you will move forward with that. So identity moratorium is kind of a step along the normative process, in my opinion. I've added some other words here because moratorium is a weird word. Synonyms for the word moratorium are ban, embargo, prohibition, or stay. This is kind of like a damming process. Again, it's not a bad thing. It's just, it takes its time, right? And you can overstay your welcome in this box. This is where you're just kind of contemplating and you're just kind of thinking and you're just kind of like in that development stage. I imagine that a lot of people are here for a while. I went directly from identity foreclosure to here. So there is that. Now we arrive at the last one, identity achievement. This is pretty easy. This is, you thought about it and you made a decision. It's important here, I mean, this is oversimplified, but this is helpful, I think. So maybe you could take a moment and identify which of these boxes you find yourself in. And maybe you could identify which one of these boxes you would like to see yourself in the next 6 months, in the next year, in the next 3 years. This is a long process, right? You don't have to figure this out overnight. You don't achieve identity overnight. Erikson thought that this stage took place in between the ages of 12 and 19, right? So, take your 7 years, take the time that you need to figure out where you're going to be and then aim your life toward that thing. The last thing that I kind of want to say here is just, it's important to remember that you are the one making these decisions. This should be a natural process. This is the outgrowth of you uncovering who you are and then becoming that person. I don't want to say that this is a comfortable process. There will be parts of it that are uncomfortable. You are pushing the boundaries. You are setting limits for yourself. You are pushing those limits. You are setting goals. Don't expect this process to be entirely comfortable. This process will be incredibly worth it. And this is the process of adolescence. This is what we have to go through. Now, I firmly believe that people who leave the LDS church late in their life have to redo this. I feel like I kind of had to redo this. And that sucks. And if you're in that place right now, I feel for you because I've been there. It is hard. But we can all make it through this. Remember that your enjoyment and your comfort is still important. So practice self-care in a way that's helpful for you. Do things that you find relaxing. Do things that help you decompress from the stresses of life. We need as many people in the identity achievement box as possible because that really is, each individual is the building block of society, in my opinion. And strong building blocks make a strong culture, a good culture, a lovely culture. I often wonder to myself just how happy, just how pleasant, just how good life could actually be if all of us really, in a loving way, pushed ourselves toward reaching our maximum potential, reaching identity achievement. So I've been Uber Mormon today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.